in the heart of the ancient village of Ngara, where legends are older than the trees and whispers of the past ride on the wind, the people gathered under the heavy sky. It was a day of sorrow, marked by the funeral of Chief Kunto, a man respected by many, but truly known by few. The village stood still as mourners poured in from every corner, dressed in dark robes, their heads bowed in silence. The scent of burning herbs filled the air, and sacred chants began to echo from the circle of elders, each word a farewell carved in memory. Amid the sea of mourners stood Azima, Chief Kunto's only child, draped in deep indigo. Her face was a storm of silent pain. She didn't cry. Her grief ran too deep for tears. Her hands clutched the edge of her robe tightly, and her eyes stayed fixed on the wooden casket at the center. As the drums began to beat, slow, steady, ancient, each thump seemed to match the ache in her chest. The air was thick with emotion. It wasn't just a man being buried. It felt like a chapter of the village itself was being closed. Azima stood quietly, her heart heavy, eyes locked on her father's casket. She barely noticed the world around her. Her thoughts drifted like smoke, memories of her father carrying her on his shoulders, his quiet wisdom, his gentle voice reading her stories under the moonlight. But then came the strange memories too. How in the past year he had changed. He had grown distant. His eyes always seemed tired. He would sit for hours alone, whispering to himself, or clutching that old wooden drum he never let anyone touch. Azima had asked questions, but he only smiled and said, "Some truths must sleep." She never understood what he meant. As the ceremony moved forward, a wave of murmurs began to spread through the crowd. Azima looked up, startled, and turned to see what had caught everyone's attention. Walking slowly toward the gathering was Nolitha, her stepmother. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. She wasn't wearing black, as was custom during mourning. Instead, she wore a flowing red gown, bright, bold, and completely out of place. It shimmered under the sun like fire. It wasn't just the color, it was the way she walked, confident, almost proud, as if she had won something. Gasps floated through the crowd. Elders exchanged glances. Some villagers covered their mouths in shock. Red was not a color of grief in Ngara. It was a color of celebration, of victory, of blood. To wear red at a funeral was unheard of, almost like a curse. It was seen as mocking the spirits. Still, Nolitha walked on, her head held high, her lips curled in a strange half-smile. She didn't cry. She didn't look broken, or even sad. She moved, as though this day belonged to her. Azima's heart pounded. A cold feeling crept up her spine. She had never truly understood Nolitha. Since she came into their lives, she had always been distant, cold, not cruel, but never warm either. She rarely spoke to Azima, and when she did, her words were clipped and dry. Azima tried to love her once. She even gifted her a handmade bracelet when she was younger. Nolitha never wore it, and now, here she was, dressed like a queen at a celebration, at her husband's funeral. Azima didn't know what to think. She felt embarrassed, confused, and strangely afraid. The air around her seemed to change, like something invisible had entered the space. The drums that once felt comforting now sounded far away, like echoes from another world. The energy had shifted, and everyone felt it. Nolitha reached the casket and stood beside it, still smiling faintly. She didn't bow her head. She didn't whisper a prayer. She just stood there, looking at the wooden box that held her husband's body, with eyes that held something unreadable, something dark. The villagers watched, waiting for someone to speak, to correct her, to remind her of the customs. But no one dared. Even the elders remained quiet, their faces pale. Azima clenched her fists. She wanted to scream, to ask Nolitha what she was doing, why she was dressed like that, why she was acting like this was a game. But her voice wouldn't come. All she could do was stare and feel the ground shift beneath her feet. Something was wrong, very wrong, and deep down, Azima knew this funeral was not going to end like any other. Just as the priest stepped forward to say the final blessings, the village fell into complete silence. The griot, an old man with a voice like rustling leaves, began to chant the sacred farewell, a song passed down through generations, meant to guide the soul of the dead into the arms of the ancestors. The chant floated through the air like a spell, wrapping everyone in a moment of deep stillness. The only sounds were the soft sobs of mourners and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Azima stood motionless, her eyes glistening, her chest tightening with each word the griot spoke. Then, out of nowhere, a sound shattered the silence like a stone thrown through glass. Nolitha laughed, a loud, sharp, almost wicked laugh that cut through the funeral like a blade. It wasn't a chuckle or a laugh of nervous sorrow. It was clear, deliberate, bold. It echoed through the sacred ground, bouncing off the ancient trees and into every ear like a bad omen. People froze. Gasps shot through the crowd like sparks. A woman dropped her clay pot. A child began to cry. Even the birds flew off from the nearby trees, startled by the sudden noise. No one could believe what they had just heard. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a violation of everything sacred. The priest stopped mid-sentence, mouth slightly open. The village chief, who had stood calmly all day, turned sharply toward Nolitha, his face unreadable. Azima felt her heart jump. Her ears rang. She thought maybe she had imagined it, but the look on everyone's face confirmed the truth. Her stepmother had laughed. Right at the moment her father's body was about to be lowered into the earth. Some elders began to murmur among themselves, shaking their heads. Their expressions were tight with disapproval, some even with fear. In an Ngara, funerals were not just goodbyes. They were spiritual journeys. To disturb them was dangerous, and many believed that disrespecting the dead could bring curses not just to the family, but to the whole village. But Nolitha didn't look ashamed. She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed pleased with herself. Her smile remained. Her eyes scanned the crowd like she was watching a show. It was as if she was daring someone to question her. Azima couldn't move. Her feet felt stuck to the ground. Her mind raced with questions. Why would Nolitha do this? What did it mean? Was she mocking her father? Was this some kind of revenge? Azima had no answers, only a growing knot in her stomach that told her something wasn't right. This laugh wasn't madness. It was something else. Something calculated. The priest stepped back, uncertain. The griot lowered his head. The drums, unsure whether to continue, fell silent. The air, once sacred and heavy with meaning, now felt cold and broken. Something had shifted. The ceremony had been interrupted, and with that interruption, a sense of unease began to settle over everyone. The villagers whispered. Some said Nolitha had always been strange. Some believed she was hiding something, but no one said a word aloud. No one had the courage to confront her in that moment. Azima looked at her stepmother with wide eyes. That laugh still echoed in her ears. It would haunt her for days to come. She didn't know it yet, but that sound had just opened the door to a truth buried deeper than any grave. Every head in the crowd slowly turned toward Nolitha. The atmosphere, already heavy with grief, now felt strange and tense, like the air before a storm. For a few long seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. It was as if the entire village had been paused by something unseen. Even the birds in the trees seemed to have gone quiet, as if they too were stunned by what they had just heard. Eyes widened, mouths fell open, and people exchanged uneasy glances. Some of the elders leaned in closer to each other, whispering in low, nervous tones. Children clutched their mothers' hands. The village healer made a small sign of protection with her fingers. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was dangerous. To laugh during the sacred rite was to challenge the ancestors, to stir something that should never be awakened. Azima stood completely still. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. Her chest was tight, her fingers trembling by her side. She couldn't understand what was happening. She had always feared Nolitha in a quiet, distant way, but now that fear felt real, it stood in front of her, wearing red and smiling after laughing at her father's final goodbye. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but nothing came out. Her mouth was dry, her voice gone. All she could do was stare, eyes locked on her stepmother's face, searching for a reason. Was it madness? Was it hatred? Or was it something deeper? The villagers waited. It felt like time had slowed. Surely someone would say something. Surely the village chief, or the priest, or the elders would speak. But they didn't. They looked just as lost as Azima did. They were waiting too, unsure of what came next. Then Nolitha raised her hand, slowly, calmly, with confidence. And just like that, the quiet whispers stopped. The small movements around the funeral froze again. It was a gesture that held unexpected power. She hadn't said a word, but that small motion was enough to hold back the wave of judgment that was about to crash over her. Her eyes scanned the crowd. They were sharp, cold, and knowing. She looked at each face as if she already knew their thoughts, their fears, and their secrets. And no one dared to meet her gaze for long. One by one, heads dropped. People looked away. Azima felt as if Nolitha's hand wasn't just stopping the crowd, it was stopping her breath. Her stepmother hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken her name, but Azima felt exposed, like Nolitha could see right into her, and that terrified her more than anything else. Nobody knew what to do next. Should the priest continue? Should the griot speak again? The ceremony had been broken, and nobody knew how to fix it. The air was no longer sacred. It was uneasy, suspicious, electric. All eyes remained on Nolitha, even as she slowly lowered her hand and returned it to her side. Her smile faded, but the power in her presence stayed. Azima knew something had changed. Not just the funeral, not just the mood. Something deeper had shifted, something she couldn't explain yet. It was the beginning of something strange, something that had been waiting, perhaps for years, to rise. Nolitha stood still in front of the crowd, her hand now lowered, her expression unreadable. Everyone was watching her, holding their breath, waiting for an explanation. Some expected an apology, others waited for a sign of regret. But what came next was something no one was prepared for. She turned slowly to face the villagers, her eyes scanning each face, from the oldest elder to the youngest child. The silence was thick, heavy, unbroken. Then, in a voice both calm and sharp, she spoke. "You cry for a man who wore a mask," she said. "But today I laugh, for the mask is buried with him." Her words fell into the silence like stones into still water, each one sending ripples through the crowd. There was no sound, no response, just stunned faces and wide, questioning eyes. Azima felt her heart skip. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them felt deep, dangerous, like they held a truth no one wanted to touch. What did she mean? That her father was hiding something, that he wasn't who everyone thought he was. Azima's mind raced. She had grown up seeing her father as a quiet, wise, and loving man, but she also remembered how he had changed in the past year, how distant he had become, the secrets, the strange silences, the locked room in their home. Her heart twisted with confusion. Was Nolitha revealing something, or was she twisting the truth? Around her, the villagers stood frozen. No one spoke. Even the elders who had always had something to say looked uncertain. Some furrowed their brows, others looked down, avoiding eye contact. The air shifted again, colder this time, not because of the weather, but because of fear, the fear of what those words might truly mean. One woman clutched her chest. Another whispered a prayer under her breath. A man shook his head slowly, as if trying to reject what he had just heard. But no one challenged Nolitha. No one dared to ask questions. Azima's eyes filled with tears, not just from grief, but from the storm of doubt now rising inside her. Was her father hiding something dark? Was the man she loved and trusted not who she believed he was? Or was Nolitha poisoning his memory out of bitterness or revenge? But Nolitha didn't explain. She said no more. She didn't try to clear the air or share any secrets. Instead, she turned around without another word and began walking, calmly, slowly, toward the woods behind the village. Her red dress floated behind her like a flame. The crowd parted without a sound, watching her disappear between the trees. She didn't look back. The silence she left behind was deafening. No one moved for a long moment. No one dared to speak first. Her final words lingered in the air like smoke, thick and hard to breathe through. They didn't just disturb the funeral. They shook the foundation of what the village believed about Chief Kunto. Azima was left standing alone, staring at the place where Nolitha had vanished. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her father's face flashed in her mind. Was Nolitha telling the truth? What was the mask she spoke of? And why now? Why reveal it here, at the funeral? The answers, if they existed, had just walked into the forest with a woman in red, leaving behind a grave, a broken silence, and 1,000 unspoken questions. That night, Azima lay awake, staring at the roof of her small mud hut. unable to sleep. The image of Nolitha disappearing into the woods in her red dress played over and over in her mind, like a shadow she couldn't shake. Her stepmother's strange words echoed louder now in the silence of the night. You cry for a man who wore a mask. The mask is buried with him. Azima didn't want to believe it, but the words unlocked something. Memories she had pushed away, moments from her childhood that never made sense until now. She remembered the arguments, not loud ones, but whispered, tense exchanges late at night between her father and Nolitha. She had often woken up to the soft sound of their voices through the wall. Sometimes it was Nolitha's voice, sharp and angry. Other times it was her father, calm but stern. She never understood what they were talking about, but there was always a weight in their voices, a heaviness that didn't belong in an ordinary home. Then there was the drum. It had always seemed special to her father, an old wooden drum with carvings too faded to understand. He kept it in his study and never let anyone touch it, not even Azima. Once, when she was about 10, she had tried to lift the cloth covering it. Her father walked in just as her fingers touched the edge. He didn't shout, but the look in his eyes had frozen her in place. He covered the drum again and simply said, "Not yet, Azima, not yet." What did that mean? But the strangest memories were about Nolitha. Every few weeks, usually on nights when the moon was high, Azima had seen her stepmother leave the house quietly, thinking no one noticed. Nolitha would wear a dark shawl, cover her head, and walk barefoot out of the compound. Azima had once followed her at a distance, her curiosity stronger than her fear. Nolitha had walked straight to the sacred tree, the one no children were allowed near, the tree that villagers said had roots older than the village itself. There, Nolitha would just stand, sometimes touch the bark, sometimes whisper things Azima couldn't hear. Once, she stayed there until sunrise. And then there was the river. Azima remembered the clearest night of all. She had gone to fetch water late, something she was told never to do, but the family needed it, and her father wasn't home. As she reached the riverbank, she saw Nolitha kneeling by the water, her hands touching the surface gently. Azima froze behind a tree. That's when she heard Nolitha's voice, soft and strange, like a chant. "Soon, the truth will drown with him," she said. Azima hadn't understood it then. She had run back home, shaken, and told herself it didn't mean anything. But now, years later, with her father buried and Nolitha's laughter still haunting the village, those words struck deep. She turned on her mat, pulling the thin blanket up to her chest. Her heart beat fast. Everything was connected. The arguments, the locked drum, the sacred tree, the river whispers. Nolitha had been waiting for this day, and her father had known something too. He had hidden it all from Azima. But why? What truth were they both holding on to? That night, Azima didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, wide-eyed, knowing that her stepmother hadn't just walked away from the funeral. She had left behind a mystery, and Azima was now standing right in the center of it. Azima sat in silence, the flickering lantern casting soft shadows on the walls of her late father's hut. The night air was thick and still, the kind that made even the crickets hesitate to sing. Mourning rites required her to stay in the hut for 3 nights, alone with memories, grief, and whatever ghosts the silence would bring. But this night, her heart wouldn't let her rest. Nolitha's words kept spinning in her head like wind around an empty drum. The mask is buried with him. What mask? What was he hiding? Her eyes landed on the corner of the room, the old woven mat, the clay pots, and finally, the chest. Inside it was the drum. She got up slowly, barefoot on the cold dirt floor, and walked to it. The drum looked older now, more silent than it had ever been. The carvings on it seemed to whisper in the lantern's glow. Azima had never touched it again after that day her father caught her, but tonight felt different. Something inside her pulled her toward it, like a string tied to her chest. She knelt and ran her fingers along the edge. The leather straps were worn, but strong. Her breath grew shallow as she found the knot and began untying it. It resisted at first, but finally gave way. The top of the drum lifted with a dry creak. Inside, instead of hollow space, there was something wrapped tightly in cracked goatskin, smelling of age and secrets. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. First, a sealed letter, folded and marked with her father's stamp. Second, a small leather pendant, shaped like a circle, with the mark of a snake carved into it. Not just any snake. It was the Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, a sign in Ngara of hidden cycles, of things repeating, of secrets returning. She stared at the pendant, unsure if she should touch it, but her fingers closed around it anyway. It was warm, strangely warm, as if it remembered being worn. Azima's heart thudded hard in her chest. This wasn't just an ornament, it meant something, maybe to her father, maybe to Nolitha, maybe to both. Then she turned her eyes to the letter. Her name was written on it, in her father's handwriting, soft, careful strokes. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. The air felt heavy around her, like the walls of the hut were leaning in to listen. She didn't open it yet. She sat there, clutching the letter and the pendant, realizing that everything Nolitha said had weight. Her father had worn a mask, maybe not of lies, but of silence. And now, through this drum, this letter, this snake-shaped clue, she was finally being invited into the truth he never spoke aloud. The truth wasn't just buried with him, it was left behind for her to find. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded in places, but every word carried a weight that pressed on Azima's chest as she read. The letter spoke of secrets buried deeper than any grave in Ngara. It told of a life Azima never knew her father lived, of a choice that changed the course of many lives, including her own. He confessed that the woman everyone knew as his wife had never truly come for love. She belonged to the ancient Maza, a clan whispered about in folktales, believed by most to be long gone, but they were real, and Nolitha was one of their spiritual enforcers, trained to protect sacred objects, punish betrayal, and never let the balance of power fall into the wrong hands. Long ago, he had been trusted by the Maza. They gave him a talisman of great power to guard, a small pendant, the same one now clutched in Azima's hand. It wasn't just a symbol, it held something deep, something alive. But then, against every law and every promise, he fell in love. Not with Nolitha, but with Zalika, Azima's mother, a woman outside the clan, a woman of light, laughter, and gentleness. His love for Zalika made him break the sacred oath. He chose her over duty, over the Maza. Instead of returning the talisman, he hid it. He kept it close and silent. He tried to live a quiet life, hoping the past wouldn't find him, but the Maza did not forget. They sent Nolitha, not with open fury, but with quiet fire. She arrived as his second wife, but her mission was never family, it was retrieval, or destruction. He wrote of the nights she warned him, of the fights Azima had once overheard. Nolitha had given him time, tried to convince him, but he held on. For love, for Azima, for fear. Every step she took toward the sacred tree, every whisper to the river, had been part of that mission. He had hoped the truth would die with him, but his heart wouldn't let it. He needed Azima to know, because now, with him gone, Nolitha might not stop. The last line was the one that stayed with Azima the longest. The talisman answers to blood. Protect it, or it will destroy more than you know. Her hands shook as she folded the letter. The pendant, warm in her palm, pulsed faintly. It wasn't just a piece of the past. It was a key to everything her father had tried to protect. And now it was hers. The truth had not drowned. It had waited for her. The room felt colder as the words on the letter sank deeper into Azima's heart. She had thought the truth would end with the talisman and her father's betrayal of the Maza, but it went further, much further. Her eyes moved to the next section of the letter, and with each word, her world shifted again. He wrote that when she was born, the elders noticed something unusual. The night she took her first breath, the wind changed. The fire in the village square roared without wood, and the drums in the shrine echoed without hands. It was the sign of Echunjo, a rare and powerful gift. It meant she carried the voice of the ancestors inside her. It meant that the spirits could speak through her, guide her, warn her, or even curse those who stood against her. But Chief Kunto had been afraid. He had seen what happened to others who carried the gift. Some were worshipped, yes, but others were used, feared, even killed. So he made a choice. He hid it. He stopped the rituals that would have awakened the gift fully. He kept her from the sacred places, from the chants, from the stories. He raised her in silence, thinking it would protect her. But not everyone was blind to the truth. Nolitha knew. She had known from the beginning. The gift of Echunjo ran through the blood of the Maza, but it hadn't appeared in generations. And now it was reborn, not in a warrior of the clan, but in the daughter of the man who betrayed them. That, more than the stolen talisman, was what truly mattered. That was why Nolitha stayed all these years, why she endured life with a man she did not love, and a girl who knew nothing of her power. She waited. Years passed. She said nothing. She didn't attack. She didn't force. She waited for time to do what she could not. Take Chief Kunto naturally, because only when he was gone could she act. Only then could she return to the Maza, not just with the talisman, but with the girl who carried the ancestral voice. Azima's hands clenched. That laugh, the one that tore through the funeral like lightning, it had haunted her for hours, but now she understood. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't madness. It was a message, a signal. The path is clear. Those were the last words her father wrote before the ink smudged. Nolitha had waited, and now she would come. Not just for the talisman, but for Azima herself. The silence in the hut was deafening. The lantern flame flickered. Azima could hear her own heartbeat. She wasn't just a chief's daughter anymore. She was something more, something ancient, something powerful, something the Maziga wanted back. And now she had a choice. Run, hide, or finally listen to the voice within. Azima stood beneath the twisted branches of the tree of old spirits, the pendant around her neck, and the letter tucked tightly in her hand. The air was heavy, thick with silence and memory. The tree was older than the village itself, its roots said to reach into the bones of ancestors. As she stepped closer, the ground felt different, like it remembered her steps before she took them. She knelt, placing the pendant at the base of the trunk, just as the wind began to stir, soft at first, then stronger, wrapping around her like invisible arms. The whispers came next, gentle voices, ancient and layered, speaking in tongues she did not learn but somehow understood. Her chest rose and fell with growing rhythm. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. This time, it was something else. Power. Visions flashed before her eyes. Faces she had never seen, but felt she knew. The voice of her mother's laughter. The stern warning in her father's tone. Nolitha's cold eyes watching from the shadows. And then, deeper, she saw the Maziga cloaked in mist, keepers of balance, guardians of forgotten things. Azima gasped. The pendant pulsed against her skin. Her fingers glowed faintly with warmth, and a soft light shimmered at her feet. She felt herself standing, not as a girl, but as something more, something awakened. Then, from the trees, Nolitha stepped into view. Her eyes were calm, calculating. She expected to see a scared child clinging to relics and confusion, but what she saw stopped her in her tracks. Azima stood tall, the whispers of the ancestors swirling around her like a cloak. The tree of old spirits no longer stood silent. It sang with her voice. Nolitha spoke softly. "You know now." Azima answered, her voice steady. "I do." They stared at each other for a long breath. Then Nolitha stepped forward, lifting her hand to claim the pendant. But before she could reach it, a burst of light surged from the tree's roots, circling Azima like a shield. The curse that had shadowed her family for years, of silence, fear, and hidden truth, broke with the force of thunder. Nolitha stumbled back, her eyes wide. The power she came to reclaim had already chosen, and it did not choose her. Azima raised her hand, and with a single word, whispered in the tongue of the ancestors, sealed the talisman's spirit forever. Not hidden, not stolen, but protected. Nolitha disappeared into the forest without a word. Her mission failed. The sky opened just as dawn touched the village. Bells rang, and the villagers gathered at the sacred hill. When they saw Azima descend from the woods, the pendant glowing softly and peace in her eyes, they fell silent. Then, one by one, they began to chant her name, not in grief, but in honor. The true heir had risen, and the spirits finally could rest.